Chapter 6. It took me another 2 hours to simmer down. That only happened when I admitted to myself that not only had I been hoping that Mallory would turn out to be Magid material, but I had also, on the basis of her personality traits, been building up a picture of a brave person in considerable adversity. She had a broken home. She had been jilted by this man, Robbie. She had no money and was forced to live with a bitchy aunt, and on top of this, her father, adoptive father, I suppose, was dying of cancer. I had been prepared to be wonderfully sorry for her. But all that went when I saw her grotesque bag-like figure prancing at the side of the road. Then, after the way she had first ignored and then looked at me, I wanted to go and shake the hand of that ex-boyfriend and tell him he was well out of it. I was well out of it. It was worth £100. Cheap at the price. "Ready to talk now?" Stan asked. "Yes," I said. "What you want to do," he said, "is collect all your candidates in one place and interview them for the job. Am I correct?" I had been brooding with my chin on my chest. I sat up. "But how?" "The extreme way," he said. "Tweak their fate lines. Bring them to you." "Is it permissible?" I said. I had thought that way was only for emergencies. Anything that involved meddling in someone's personal life without their permission was to be considered only in extreme need. "Yes, you're allowed to do it if you're choosing a new Magid. That's important," Stan said. "You'd be doing it anyway by appointing someone, if you think about it." "Okay, but not tonight," I said. What Stan was suggesting was a fairly arduous process. I've always thought it lucky it is so difficult, or Magids, and other people, might be tempted to do it for trivial reasons. Done often, it could bring chaos to more than one world. It can also bring chaos down on the Magid who does the working, unless it is done carefully, with proper safeguards. If you don't get it right, you can tangle your own fate lines disastrously with those of the people you are trying to influence. A Magid is supposed to be a free agent. One of the things which is done when you become a Magid is that your personal fate lines are freed from those of the rest of the multiverse. Rather a lonely state, actually. Anyway, I knew it was going to take days, and I didn't want to be interrupted. The next day, I finished all my ordinary business, somewhat late, but too bad, Mallory's fault, and then disconnected my phones from this world and the others. I shut down all the computers, including the one devoted to Magid business, and hung what amounted to a "do not disturb" notice on that one. I was a little irritated to find a series of faxes from General Dacros had come in overnight. The first said triumphantly that his experts had deciphered the genetic codes on the 2 lists. They would be able to recognise all the heirs when they found them. The second told me that Naros was still untraced. The third that Jeffros thought Naros was hidden by magic. The fourth asked me outright to come and discover Naros for them. I faxed back briskly that I saw no reason why they should maintain the Emperor's secrecy, and suggested that they advertise for Naros in the media. Then I unplugged the machine. "See?" I said to Stan. "Not sentimental at all." Then I set to work with a large globe of the world, pins, and strands of cotton. It was important to find a point in this country to which it was best to summon my 4 candidates. Because this was fate line work, the place had to be a node of power. There are a surprising number of these nodes in the British Isles, and the distance between this place and each of the 4 people had to satisfy mathematical laws. It also had to be somewhere where any of them might naturally expect to go. Even though they would be tugged to this spot by a series of Magid-made accidents, I could not stretch the laws of probability too far, for fear the 3 I did not select would notice. This was why I ruled out all the solitary nodes, like Stonehenge or most castles, or that hidden valley in Derbyshire, and looked mainly at towns or at country places where there were conference centres. Before long, I was sitting in a heap of guidebooks and information leaflets, darting between these and the globe, and then to the detailed maps spread out on the floor. I needed a mundane, normal-seeming node. Stan was a great help here. As a jockey, he had rushed all over the country to racecourses in every corner of it, and he knew hotels and nodes I had never heard of. Myself, I had hoped to bring everyone together in London, but that did not satisfy the numerical conditions. Annoyingly, it would have been fine had Mallory still been in the equation. I found I was interrupted here by a great rush of anger and exasperation at Mallory. How dared she lead me such a dance? How dared she go on doing so, even when I had eliminated her? Stan recalled me by suggesting we considered some of the nodes in the Midlands. There are some good strong ones there. I wondered about Nottingham, but the numbers were off there too. Pity that, Stan said. Nottingham's a place where everyone goes sooner or later. All sorts of reasons. You want a lot of reasons. Concerts, conferences, or a racecourse would do it. There are reasons for going to Birmingham, I said, but the node there's only a pinprick. How about Stratford-upon-Avon? Too many tourists, he said. Is Wigan any good? Wigan was numerically wrong. After hours of discussion and measuring and reading brochures, we settled on a medium-sized town called Wanchester. We both knew it. Stan said there were at least 2 good hotels there because of the racecourse. The guidebook claimed there were conference facilities and a factory that made small arms. These were clearly new since Stan's day and mine. Stan remembered a pleasant, sleepy town. My memories were from a summer holiday there with my family, and I mostly remembered the river. There had been a fishing competition there for children. I had been in the grip of a fishing craze. I suppose I would be about 9 at that time, and I had eagerly enrolled in the competition. I fished all day without the slightest luck. I remember, disentangling my line from a willow tree for at least the 40th time when my brother Will arrived and wanted to try his luck too. He never wanted to be outdone by his younger brothers. The supervisor must have been very good-humoured. He gave Will instructions, and Will borrowed my rod, and the supervisor left us to it. Will, in his usual way of always succeeding in everything, almost instantly hooked a fine, fat fish. He struck at precisely the right moment and landed it perfectly. Then there was terrible trouble, because Will couldn't bear to kill it, and neither could I. It flopped about madly. We shouted for the supervisor, but he was out of hearing, and we were forced to deal with it ourselves. Between us, we succeeded in getting the hook out of its mouth, and we threw it back in the river, where it floated on its side, convulsing and obviously dying. Will realised he had half killed it. He burst into tears, even though he was 13. I felt awful. I kept trying to get the fish out of the river again, and I couldn't. We were in this state when our brother Simon wandered by. Simon hates killing things, so he'd kept away from the fishing. And when he saw us, Will in tears and me white and dithering, he simply waded into the water, fetched out the fish, and whacked its head on a stone. There, he said, and went on his way. I gave up fishing after that. Will never tried again. Later on, these memories of Wanchester struck me as decidedly inauspicious. Maybe they did even at the time. If so, I dismissed them, because I was tired of looking. Wanchester fitted our requirements. Stan and I both knew the town. That was sufficient. Wanchester it is, then, we said. The next step was, of course, to go to the place and check it out. I wish you could come too, I said to Stan. You don't need me to help you look at a town, he said, threatening huffiness. I was beginning to see that Stan got irritated whenever I went somewhere without him. I said no more. The next day, I drove up to Wanchester and found the place still very pleasant, despite a one-way system and the cold wind of late February. I even took a walk by the river for old time's sake. There were willow trees, currently bare, and brown water swirling under the bridge, just as I remembered. But the river walk was curtailed since that far-off holiday by the new factory built on the riverside. So I walked back into the town, to the large hotel I had seen standing across the end of the main square. The hotel I remembered dimly, although we had stayed in a guest house, but my chief memory was of the way the square was more like a very wide street, with a market in it. To my joy, the square, or street, was full of stalls that day too. and I stared at crockery, fruit and clothing, much as there had been when I was a 9-year-old, all the way to the hotel. I was rather disconcerted to find it was called Hotel Babylon. There is no such thing as coincidence, thought I, and pushed through the large glass doors. Inside, it was large and hushed, and a queer mixture of modern decor with traditional market town habits. There seemed to be mirrors everywhere, and the receptionist was foreign, but the place was filled with hunting and fishing types who were here for the horse sales, and lunch was traditional and nourishing, served by staff with local accents. As I ate chicken and mushroom pie among the mirrors, I realised that the building was actually on the node. Better and better. After lunch, I inquired about booking a room for the Easter weekend. Stan and I had settled on Easter because that is a powerful time node. I could get no sense out of the Thorne Lady. I asked to see the manager. His name was Alfred Douglas, but that was not his fault. Easter weekend, he said. He was very sorry, but all the rooms were taken by a convention over Easter. I nearly went away. Possibly I should have done. Things would certainly have turned out very differently if I had. I was within a whisker of deciding to try another town when it occurred to me to ask what kind of convention, expecting the reply to be Freemasons, social workers, or some kind of business training. A book lovers' convention, Mr. Alfred Douglas told me. Science fiction and fantasy, or he believed the term might be speculative fiction. That kind of area, sir, anyway. There is no such thing as coincidence, I thought, marvelling. Mervyn Thurles wrote science fiction. According to my American contacts, Fisk had once taught a course about writing it. I didn't know how Punt and Gabrielizovich felt about this genre, but there were half my candidates at least ready to fit in. 2 of them could come here in the most natural manner possible. But that's just what I was looking for, I said. Deeper inquiries elicited the fact that the convention guaranteed to fill the hotel for 5 days and did the booking for its members. But Mr. Alfred Douglas was happy to let me have the name, address and telephone number of the organiser. He was called Rick Corrie. I phoned him from the hotel. He was very pleasant. I liked at once the voice that answered, "Phantasmacon Hotel Liaison here." We had a very agreeable conversation, in the course of which I discovered that Corrie, like me, worked with computers from his home. Certainly I would join the convention, he said, and named a modest fee that he apologised for. It seemed the sum had gone up after Christmas. He would, he said, send me the details and the hotel booking form, and urged me to get it back to him quickly because the hotel was already quite full. I gave him my address. "What happens if I send my form back, but you find the hotel is booked solid?" I asked. "Oh, we try to fit everyone in," he said cheerfully. "A lot of fans sleep on the floor. Don't tell Alfred Douglas that. But I've got the station hotel lined up to take the overflow if there is one. But you'll want to be in the Babylon if you can. That's where the action will be." I promised to get my application back to him by return of post and rang off. Then I did a small amount of adjusting before I left, to ensure that I and my 4 candidates would indeed have rooms here, and, perhaps it was the thought of a letter by return of post, I found myself once more interrupted by a surge of rage against Mallory. So, as an afterthought, I did some more adjusting, to make sure that Mallory could have nothing to do with this. Then I went home, rather pleased with my day's work. There followed a time of intense, detailed labour to wind the fate lines in exactly the right way. Almost the only communication I had with the outside worlds was when I received from Rick Corrie a bundle of highly peculiar stuff. Opening it, I wished that Fisk, Punt, or Thurles had replied to me anything like so promptly. In fact, none of them ever replied. Either my letters went astray, or they did not strike any of the 3 as important, and was once again seized with irrational rage at Mallory. My fingers quivered with fury as I examined Corrie's bundle. Some of it was the booking forms he had promised me. That concerning the hotel was normal enough, except that I was required to state whether or not I wanted mushrooms for breakfast. But the booking form for the actual convention was full of curious passages. I read, "Fans wishing to enter the masquerade should state in advance whether animal, human, or other. We're having 3 classes this year. And a little further on, Phantasma cook entries must be checked in on arrival. The hotel manager has asked that no actual construction of green slime, etc. be done in the hotel bedrooms. And right at the end, we regret having to ban explosions, but after last year, the cost of insurance is now too high. Wondering what happened last year, I turned to the thing labelled Progress Report 3 and stared at it. My face was probably a study. Stan demanded to know what was the matter. Hobbits will be mustering under Gandalf as usual in the ops room, I read out to him. Esoterica with the Master Mage is in a dimension yet to be fixed. Filking will be in the home universe this year. Writer's Circle is rounding nicely in the hands of Wendy the Willow, but there are rumours of another. Watch this space. Bumpkin has agreed to handle games and Games Workshop. No charges of fraud in the tarot classes this year, please. Our new reader is a genuine sensitive. There are still a few places in the dealer's room. Apply to Eisenstein. Security will be handled by Hitler Enterprises, and all swords are to be in their charge until Sunday. Stan, who are these people?
Ordinary folks having fun, I expect, he said. Nobody's really normal when you come down to it. But I'll tell you something. They can't draw.
He was right. The brochure, if that's what it was decorated with blurred portraits of wizards, witches, and girls wearing little but jewellery. All were extremely badly drawn. Oh well, I said, and sent the man Corrie a cheque. A week later, he sent me a receipt and a certificate to say I was now an official member of Phantasmacon, with a room booked in the Hotel Babylon to prove it. Otherwise, as I said, I was hard at work, both in the house and in the shed at the end of the yard. The shed is one of the reasons I bought the house. It is big and airy, and someone had already laid a smooth wooden floor in it. I have added heating. That floor means I can chalk symbols and figures at need. For Fateline work, you need, among other things, a double spiral eternity, which is the very devil to get drawn right. Shortly after Corrie's certificate arrived, I was crawling on the floor in my barn, dressed in my oldest clothes, chalking and rubbing out and chalking again, when I looked up to see Andrew standing in the doorway. He gave no sign that he thought I might be doing something out of the ordinary. He said in his vague, deadpan way, "I was wondering when you might be ready to give me a lift." I'd forgotten his car had broken down. I got up, dusted my knees, and devoted the rest of the day to sorting him out. I remember that sometime while I was driving him, either to Cambridge or Huntingdon or back, I said airily, "I do a lot of programming on my knees. It helps to see it all spread out." He said, "I do a lot of my thinking working over the fields." I assumed all was well, but I took the precaution, when I went back to work next day, of putting heavy prohibitions round the barn, and round the house, the yard, and my strip of front garden too. Then, confident that I could not be disturbed again, I went back to chalking and crawling. By the early evening, I was ready to walk the spiral. It takes immense concentration, because you are pulling 4 people's fate lines with you, not to speak of your own, and you can do a great deal of harm. To those people, and to the rest of the other world where their lines connect to everyone else's, if you get it wrong. I was shuffling forwards along the chalk lines with my arms spread to keep the world in balance, when I looked up to see a figure straddling the loop at the far end. I couldn't see the person clearly because he was silhouetted against the stream of orange sunlight slanting from the high window of the barn. Chalk dust and motes from the barn itself were catching the light too and standing round him like rays. He looked vast. You know that feeling when your stomach seems to drop away, leaving you cold and empty? I felt that. But I couldn't stop. That would have been really dangerous. My first thought was, well, at least it isn't Mallory. I wouldn't have put it past her. Then I thought it might be Stan, made visible by the dust. But the figure was too huge. I had to shuffle on for another 5 minutes, until I came to a place where the sunlight lit him sideways from my point of view. Then I could see it was Andrew. He was just standing there, staring. He seemed totally bemused, but I could see his eyes watching me. "You shouldn't be here," I said to him, when I could spare the attention. He smiled. It worried me, the way that smile made him look so intelligent. But he seemed to be in a sort of trance state in spite of it. I could feel he was when I got close to him. Since he was across my chalk marks, I had to take him by the elbows and move him aside. He moved, just like a zombie, and stood where I put him. I shuffled on past and round the spirals at the top of the loop, hoping for the best. But when I had rounded the curve at the top to face the other way, I found Andrew had moved again while my concentration was elsewhere, and was now straddling the loop at the opposite end. From there, the sun shone yellow on his blank, austere face. Damn, I thought, and shuffled on. I had to face the fact that Andrew had somehow got himself entangled in the fate lines I was manipulating. He had no idea of it, of course. He must have wanted to borrow some sugar or something, and arrived at just the wrong moment. When I had finished, I took him by one arm, led him across the yard in the gloaming, and let him out of the gate. He came to himself as soon as he passed my prohibitions. "Thanks," he said, as if he had now borrowed the sugar. "I'll see you." And he walked off beside the hedge to his own house.
"Look on the bright side," Stan said when I told him. "It wasn't Mallory."
"God forbid," I said. "But what do you think I've done to him?"
"Lord knows,"
Stan said.
"I've never heard of this happening before, but it may be just that Magids didn't mention it. It can't be too serious. I hope. Probably the worst that can happen is for our Andrew to take a whim to report to Gandalf as a hobbit."
"I just hope that's all," I said.
Chapter 7. From Marie Mallory's Thorne Lady Directory. Extracts from various files. 1. OK, so I've been behaving badly to Janine, as usual. Janine was furious when I had to move in with them. She was so poisonous that I said to her, "You try living with your husband's sister down the road. You try to write essays that are supposed to count towards your degree with 17 children yelling round you." My dad's sister Irene has 5 kids of her own and 2 from her latest husband, but she finds life too quiet unless each of them has at least one little friend staying the night every night. Fortunately, the last thing my little fat dad did before they carted him off for chemotherapy, apart from giving me his car, that is, was to get onto his brother Ted and make Ted promise to house and feed me. So I told Janine to take her objections to Uncle Ted. She said, "What's wrong with university accommodation?" "No room," I said. I was in a flat, but it was let over my head. That's actually not quite what happened, but I wasn't going to tell Janine. Robbie was sharing the 2 rooms with me that I had used all my money paying for in advance. And then he just coolly moved his new bint Davina in instead of me. Or he said I could sleep on the sofa, I believe, though I may be wrong because I was too angry to listen at the time. I stormed off to Mum's in London, swearing never to come back. And I meant it too, until Dad made me. He made me go back, and I had to spend 1 glorious month in Aunt Irene's house. And I told Dad never again about that too, which is why he fixed things up with Uncle Ted. Janine looked daggers at me, but she doesn't go against Uncle Ted. If she did, he might notice the way she manages him. She's going to bide her time and wait to work Uncle Ted round to thinking I'm impossible. So she did that thing she does of pulling down the sleeves of her sweater so that her gold bangles jangle. Tug, tug. Toss impeccable hair. Go away, clack, click, clack, to start phoning the unfortunate girls who mind the clothes shop she owns up in Clifton. She's still sacking them for practically no reason. I heard her say to the phone as I went upstairs with another load of my stuff, "She'll have to go. I've had quite enough of her." She gets those awful sweaters she wears through that shop of hers. The one I hate most is the one she was wearing then, that looks as if she'd spilt rice pudding over one shoulder. Nick says he hates the one with the bronze baked beans most. And Janine thinks I'll corrupt Nick, or steal his affections or something. You couldn't. No one could. Nothing can influence Nick unless he wants it to. Nick is sweetly and kindly and totally selfish. It says volumes that I never once set eyes on Nick while I was living just down the road with Aunt Irene. I asked him why when I was bringing my stuff into Uncle Ted's house. "That house is full of children," he said, surprised that I should wonder. Nick himself, I should point out, is all of 14. He stood with his hands in his pockets, watching me unload boxes and plastic bags from Dad's car. "You've got a computer," he observed. "Mine's a laptop. What's yours?" "Old and cranky and incompatible with almost everything, just like me," I said. He actually picked it up and carried it to the top of his parents' house for me. I think he was doing me an honour. That, or he was afraid I'd break it. He has a low opinion of women. Well, so would I have with a mother like Janine. Then he came down again and looked at Dad's car. "It's quite nice," he said. "It's my dad's," I said, or was. He said I could have it after I passed my driving test. "When did you pass?" he said. "Hush," I said. "I don't take it till Monday." "Then how did you get it to Bristol?" he wondered. "How do you think?" I said. "Drove it, of course." "But," he began. "All alone?" he asked. "Yes," I said. I could see I had awed Master Nick. This pleased me. You have to keep someone like Nick suitably humble, or you end up washing his socks while he walks barefoot all over you. Robbie was the same, but I didn't manage to awe him for long enough. Nick has both his parents just where he wants them. I was delighted and highly chuffed to discover that Janine actually washes Nick's socks by hand for him because Nick claims to get sore feet if she doesn't. Uncle Ted hands Nick £10 notes more or less whenever they pass on the stairs. And Nick has the whole basement of the house to himself. His parents have to knock before they come in. Honestly, he showed me his basement after I'd got all my things to the attic. I think that was another honour. It's like a luxury flat down there, with all-over plum-coloured carpeting. And as for his sound system, yeah, envy. "I chose the carpet myself," he said. "Lovely funeral colour," I said. "Like a bishop's vest with mildew. You could spill whole jars of blackberry jam here and never notice." Nick laughed. "Why are you always so gloomy?" "Because I've been crossed in love," I told him. "Don't push me about it. I get dangerous." "But you're always dangerous," he said. "That's why I like you." Yes, Nick and I are getting on very well. Maybe this is why Janine objects to me. We seem to have been able to take up our old relationship exactly where it stopped, when my parents divorced and moved to London. It goes way back with me and Nick, to the time when Janine used to pay my mum to take care of Nick most of the time for her. The trouble was, Mum doesn't go for babies, though she's pretty good with teenagers, I'm here to tell you, and she used to push Nick off onto me as soon as I got home from school. Some of my earliest memories are of reaching up to push Nick's great tall pushchair up the hill to the downs, and when I toiled all the way up there, I used to fetch him out and we'd sit on the grass and invent stories. My first really bitchy row with Janine was when I was 12 and Nick was 6, and Janine discovered that Nick would rather be with me than go anywhere with her. She said I was putting fantasies into Nick's head. I told her Nick was inventing most of them himself. She said he didn't know truth from reality because of me. And I said that yes, he did, because he knew he would be bored going out with her. I suppose it helps pick up the old relationship that Nick is still exactly the same startlingly good-looking child he was when I wheeled him up the hill and old ladies used to stop me and say what a beautiful little brother I'd got. And I always said, he's not my brother, he's my cousin. Except that these days he's about a yard taller and I have to crane upwards to see his face. He says I haven't changed either. He's right. I haven't grown since I was 12, and still the same round face, like a badly drawn heart on a school valentine. And my nose never grew either, so my specs slide off all the time like they always did. Same mousy mane of hair, same lack of figure. And I did a lot of comfort eating while I was with Mum. Like a fool, I thought health foods were invented to stop people putting on weight. So now I'm truly fat. And I always was on the plump and dumpy side. I looked in the mirror before I wrote this and wondered how Robbie ever fancied me. 2. Told me I'd failed my driving test. Well, it's not my fault. Bristol is so confusing. I don't think he should fail me just for getting us lost, though I did end up running backwards down Totterdown. I think the gradient is 1 to 5 there, because I couldn't seem to remember how to do a hill start. Now I shall have to wait another month before I can take the test again. Puh. I relieved my feelings by storming into the vet dep and applying to change to philosophy. They said I was doing quite well, and did I mean it? And I said yes. If they thought I was going to stick around watching Robbie Payne make sheep's eyes at Davina Frostic, they thought wrong. They said that wasn't a good reason to switch subjects. I said it was the only real one. So they ummed and ahed and said it wasn't possible until after Easter, or maybe even until autumn, and obviously assumed I'd have changed my mind by then. I won't. I'd let my fingernails grow while I was looking after Dad. Now I swear not to cut them for a year. They can't make me do work on animals with 6-inch talons. So. Oh, frustration! Applying for a new driving test took nearly all the money I had left. I had to tell Uncle Ted I'd pay him for my bed and board every 6 months. He took it well. He's pretty rich anyway. And Janine seems to be made of money. But God, those two are so boring. I don't blame Nick for diving away into that basement of his every evening. Before I got it sorted out that I could go away to my attic and pretend to work, I spent several centuries-long evenings sitting in their living room with them after supper. Supper. Janine doesn't cook, you know. She has what she calls her menus in the freezer, pre-packaged slenderizers. Nick and Uncle Ted eat them with 10-inch high piles of reconstituted potatoes. She and I just eat them. I keep myself awake, rumbling with hunger every night, but it must be worth it. They never go out after supper. Apparently, Uncle Ted once got struck with an idea for a book in the middle of the Welsh National Opera, and they had to leave so that he could go and write chapter 1. Janine is opposed to wasting money like that, so they stay in now. They almost never watch television because it interferes with Uncle Ted's ideas. So there we sat. Now, you'd think that a world-famous author like Uncle Ted would be really interesting to talk to. The very least you'd expect was that he'd discuss the vileness of his latest demons. No one does demons like Uncle Ted. They're really horrific. But not a bit of it. He doesn't talk about his work at all, or anything to do with it. I asked him why the second evening. Janine looked at me as if I'd remarked that the Pope was into voodoo. And Uncle Ted said he saved that kind of talk for public appearances. "Writing's a job like any other," says he. "I like to come home from the office and put my feet up, as it were." He works at home, of course. Well, It's a point of view, I said. Actually, I was scandalised. Nothing to do with the imagination should just be a job. My opinion of Uncle Ted, whom I've always rather liked and admired, went screeching downhill almost to zero. Then it went down again in a steady, depressed trundle, like a sledge on a very small slope, because Uncle Ted started talking about the house and money. Looking very satisfied with how much money he'd made lately, he told me just which bit of redecoration or alteration he's paid for out of which book. And Janine nodded enthusiastically and reminded him that Nick's basement came out of The Curse on the Cottage. And he retorted with the fitted bookcases out of Surrender, You Devil. And they both told me that after Shadowfall, they were able to afford an interior decorator to revamp the living room. I thought that was an awful way to look at a book. I thought a book was a work of art.
But we've left the windows in all the rooms as they are, Uncle Ted added. We had to.
Now, I had been fascinated by the glass in the windows. I remember it from when I was small. It waves and it wobbles. When you look out at the front, particularly in the evenings, you get a sort of cliff of trees and buildings out there, with warm-lighted squares of windows, which all sort of slide about and ripple as if they are just going to transform into something else. From some angles, the houses bend and stretch into weird shapes, and you really might believe they were sliding into a set of different dimensions. From the back of the house, it's just as striking. There, you get a navy blue vista of city against pale sunset. And when the streetlights come on, they look like holes through to the orange sky. With everything rippling and stretching, you almost think you're seeing your way through to a potent, strange place behind the city. I knew Uncle Ted was going to destroy all the strangeness by saying something dreary about his windows, and I terribly didn't want him to. I almost prayed at him not to. But he did. He said,
"It's genuine wartime glass from World War II, you know. It dates from when Hitler bombed the docks here. This house was caught in the blast and all the windows blew out and had to be replaced. So we leave the panes, whatever else we do. The glass is historic. It adds quite a bit to the value of the house."
I ask you, he writes fantasy. He has windows that go into other dimensions, and all he can think about is how much extra money they're worth. Oh, I know I'm being ungrateful and horrible. They're letting me live here, but all the same. Nick, at least, has noticed about the windows. He says they give you glimpses of a great alternate universe called Bristolia. And being in some ways as practical as his father, he has made maps of Bristolia for a role-playing game. 3. A low time. I ache inside my chest about Robbie. I go into the university, but I just mooch about there, really. One's supposed to get over being crossed in love. People do. It was months ago now, after all. I don't seem to be like other people. I don't know what I'm like. That's the trouble with being adopted and not knowing your real parents. They have little bits of ancestry you don't know about and aren't prepared for, and they come up and hit you. You don't know what to expect. And my money has dwindled away to almost nothing. 4. Well, what do you know? I got a letter from someone called Rupert Venables. I suppose he's a lawyer. No one but a lawyer could have that kind of name. He says a distant relative has left me 100 quid as a legacy. Lead me to it. Those were my first joyous thoughts. Then Janine put the kibosh on them by asking sweetly, "What distant relative, dear? Your mother's, your father's, or your own?" And Uncle Ted chipped in,
"What's this lawyer's address? That should give you a clue."
Practical Uncle Ted again. The man Venables writes from Weaver's End, Cambridgeshire. Mum's family comes entirely from South London. Dad's is all Bristol. And none of them have died recently, as far as we know. Not even my poor little fat dad, who is still hanging on in there out in Kent. That only leaves real, genuine relatives of my own who could have traced me by mysterious means. I was almost excited about it until Nick said he thought it was a cruel hoax. Nick gave his opinion an hour after the rest of us had stopped discussing it. It takes Nick that long to stop being his morning zombie self and become his normal daytime self. He got his eyes open, collected his stuff for school, and picked up the letter, which he subjected to powerful scrutiny on his way out through the back door.
The address doesn't say he's a lawyer. The letter doesn't say who's left you the money. It's a hoax, he said.
He threw the letter back at me. It missed and fell on the floor, and departed. Hoax or not, I can use the money. I wrote to the man Venables saying so. I also suggested that he should tell me more. Today he wrote back saying he'd come and give me the money. But he didn't say when, and he didn't say who'd left it to me. I don't believe a word of it. Nick is right. 5. And said I had passed my driving test. I was feeling so pessimistic by then that I didn't believe him and asked him to tell me again, and it was the same the second time round. I wonder if test examiners aren't used to being kissed. This one took it sort of stoically and then climbed out of the car and ran. I vaulted out. I tore off the L plates, shot inside the car again and drove off with a zoom. I felt a bit guilty about leaving Robbie's friend Val standing on the pavement like that, but he had only sat beside me for the 100 yards or so between his flat and the test centre. Besides, Val gives me the feeling that he thinks he's going to get me on the rebound from Robbie, and I wanted him to know different. I drove to Uncle Ted's and screamed to a stop, double-parked outside. Nick had some sort of free day off school, and I wanted him to be the first to know. Unfortunately, Janine was there too. I think she runs that clothes shop entirely by phone. Uncle Ted was in London that day, so she had come back to make sure Nick had some lunch, even though she never eats it herself. A study in sacrificial motherhood. Actually, Nick, when left to make lunch for himself, tends to drape the kitchen in several furlongs of spaghetti, and I almost see Janine's point of view on that. She was in the kitchen with Nick when I burst in. "So you failed again, dear. I'm so sorry," she says. How to replace joy with anger in 8 easy words. "No, I passed," I snapped. "Excellent," says Nick. "Now you can take me for a drive round Bristolia." "Says you," I said. And Janine put her hand on my arm and said, "Poor Marie. She's far too tired after all that concentrating. You mustn't pester her, Nick." At that, I realised that Janine was really here to prevent me risking Nick's neck in Dad's car. "Tired? Who's tired?" I said savagely. "I'm on top of the world." I wasn't by then. Janine had put me in a really bad mood. "You just think I'm not safe to drive Nick anywhere." "I didn't say that, Marie," she said, "but I do know I only started to learn to drive after I passed my test." "That's what they all say, but it's different for me," I said. "I practiced beforehand and ruined your fun." "Marie, dear," she said, "I know you love breaking all the rules, but you really are no different from everyone else. Cars are dangerous." Well, we argued, Janine all sugary sweetness and light, and me getting more and more inclined to bite. That's Janine's way. She expertly puts you in the wrong and never loses her temper. Just smiles sweetly when she's got you hopping mad. Nick simply watched and waited, and at the crucial moment he said, "You know, she's been driving that car for years, Mum."
Marie, if you're not going to drive me, I may as well go and see Fred Holbein.
No, I'll drive you. I'm coming now, I said. Nick, I forbid you to go, said Janine. He grinned at her, meltingly, and simply walked out to the car. That was it. Master Nick had decided he wanted to show me Bristolia, and the womenfolk did as he wanted. Actually, I felt quite honoured that he trusted me both to drive him and not to laugh at his Bristolia game. It put me in a much better mood. Where to? I said. Nick unfolded a large, carefully coloured map.
I think we'll start with Cliffors of the Monsters and the Castle of the Warden of the Green Wastes, he said seriously.
So I drove him to the zoo and then past the big red Gothic school there. Then we went round Durdham Down and on to Westbury-on-Trim and back to Redland. After that, I don't remember where we went. Nick had different names for everywhere and colourful histories to go with every place. He told me exactly how many miles of Bristolia we'd covered for each mile of the town. I did my best to keep an intelligent interest, but Dad's car was not behaving very well. Perhaps it believed what Nick said. After he told me we'd gone 700 miles to the zoo, it began making grinding noises and stalling on hills. I was a bit preoccupied with making it go, but Nick went on explaining eagerly, even though some of my answers were a bit vague and sarcastic. I don't think he noticed. I was rather touched, to tell the truth, because we used to play games like this, but on a smaller scale, when I was 14 and Nick was 8, and I would have died rather than hurt his feelings. We were going steeply down towards the centre, and Nick had just told me we'd now clocked up 2,000 miles of Bristolia, when he suddenly said, "Just a moment, I think we're being followed." I very nearly said, "Is this part of the game?" And I'm glad I didn't, because I was suddenly quite sure he was right. Don't ask me how. I just knew someone was behind us, looking for us, with serious intent to find us. It was not a nice feeling. I suppose Janine must have sent someone to make sure I didn't kill her Nick. So I said, "What do you suggest we do?"
"Keep going towards Bedminster," Nick said, "and I'll tell you what to do then."
Traffic was pretty thick by then. It was very useful to have someone with Nick's encyclopedic knowledge of the place to tell me what turning to take. We both dropped the Bristolia game for a tense quarter of an hour or so, while we zipped up the opposite hill across the river, came back down another way, and took the road up to the suspension bridge. The creepy feeling of someone behind us, trying to find us, left us on the way. Nick sat back with a sigh.
"That's it. We lost him. Now we're in yonder Bristolia, where most of the magic users live."
"Yes, but I wish we weren't in line for the suspension bridge," I more or less moaned.
"It's all right. I've got money to get across," Nick said.
"But it's the place I have bad dreams about," I wailed. I really didn't want to go there. My bad mood was back. It was thanks to Janine. She'd stripped the joy about passing my test of the underlying misery, and though I'd forgotten it a bit during the tour of exotic Bristolia, it was still there, as bad as ever.
"I was hoping I'd stopped you being so gloomy," Nick said.
"I can't. I've been crossed in love," I said. "And there's my dad, not to speak of the dreams." I suppose it's not surprising Nick got the wrong idea of the dreams. Clifton Suspension Bridge is notorious for suicides.
"You mean you dream about jumping off?" he said.
"No," I said. "They're weirder than that."
"Tell the dreams," he commanded.
So I told him, though they were something I'd never mentioned to a soul before. I almost don't mention them to myself, apart from calling this journal Directory Thorne Lady, just to show I know about them really. They're too nasty. They go with a horrible, depressed, weak feeling. I've been having the dreams for over 3 years now, ever since we moved to London and Mum and Dad split up, and they make me wonder if I might be going mad. I was sure Nick would think they were mad. But there is something about driving a car that makes you confiding, like a sort of mobile analyst's couch. And after Nick and I had shared the feeling of being followed, I felt as if we'd shared minds anyway. In the dreams, I am always at the Bristol end of the bridge, and I go up the steep path that cuts into the bank by the footpath there, and find I'm on a wide moorland by moonlight. Not that I ever see the moon, I just know it's moonlight. I walk until I come to a path. Some nights, I find I can dig my heels in and refuse to take that path. Then I get punished. I get lost in the dream, wandering about in beastly, marsh-like places, and wake up feeling incredibly frightened and guilty. If I give in, or can't dig my heels in, and simply follow the path, I always come to a sort of horizon, where the sky comes right down to the moor, and there is a solitary dark bush in the middle of it. That bush is an old woman. Don't ask me how. Nick asked me how. I couldn't tell him. She isn't made of twigs. She isn't the sky showing through the bush. She isn't even exactly in the bush. But in my dream, I know that the bush is the same thing as a narrow-faced, severe old woman who is probably a goddess. I don't like her. She despises me, and she's brought me here to tell me off. "Don't ever expect any sort of luck or success," she says, "until you stop this aggressive approach to life. It's not ladylike. A lady should sit gracefully by and let others handle things." She always says that sort of thing, but recently she's been on about Robbie too. At first it was the immorality of living with him, and now that seems to be over. She says, "It's degrading for a lady to go pining after a man. You won't have any luck or worth in your life until you give up university and marry a nice, normal young man." "And don't tell me it's my subconscious talking," I said to Nick. "It isn't. It's not the way you think or talk at all. It's not you," he said decidedly. "I think she's a witch." "I call her Thorne Lady," I confessed. Just then it dawned on me that Dad's car was making incredibly heavy weather of the hill up beside the gorge. We were crawling. The engine was going punk, punk, punk. And then I looked in the mirror, which I'd forgotten to do while I told Nick about the dreams. I could see a whole line of cars snorting and toiling and crawling impatiently behind us. The road behind us between the hedges was full of blue fumes. "Oh, God," I said. "What's wrong? We're breaking down." "You could try going into another gear," Nick suggested. I looked down and found I was in fourth. No wonder. I slammed us down into second and we took wings. The car gave a grateful howling sound as we hurtled round the last bends and swooped along to the bridge. Nick produced a lavish handful of coins and paid the toll machine. "It's an omen. You may have changed my luck," I said as we shimmied across the gorge. "I've been thinking about that," Nick answered. "We ought to break that dream." "Why don't we?" I knew what he was going to say. We both shouted in chorus, "Do the witchy dance for luck!" I stopped the car as soon as we were across the bridge. I vaulted out. Nick unfolded out, and we both rushed to the pavement beside where the path went up. The witchy dance was something we had done often and often when we were kids. We were convinced then that it worked too, but we were both a bit out of practice. I got into the swing of it fairly quickly. Nick was self-conscious and he took longer. We were into the third flick, flick, flick of the fingers before he loosened up. After that, we were both going like a train when people began honking and hooting horns at us. "Take no notice," I panted. Flick, flick, flick. "Luck, Luck, luck, we chanted. Break that dream. Luck, luck, luck. The horn seemed to get louder, but I had a strong feeling the witchy dance was really working. Nick says he had too, so we simply went on dancing. Next thing I knew, the man in the car behind me had climbed out and marched round to the pavement in front of me. "Go and hold your Sabbath somewhere else," he shouted. Oh, he was angry. I looked at him. I looked at his great silver car and then back at him. He was a total prat. He had a long head with smooth hair, gold-rimmed glasses, a white strappy mac, and a suit, for heaven's sake. And instead of a tie, he had one of those fancy silk cravat things. Businessman, I thought. We've made him half a minute late for an appointment. I took a glance at Nick to see what he thought, but Nick can be a real rat. He was busy injecting acute embarrassment into every pore of himself. He stood there and he cringed, the rat. "It wasn't me, sir. She made me do it, officer. The woman tempted me and I did eat, Lord. I could have smacked him." So I fought my own battle as usual by pushing my glasses up my nose with one finger in order to point a truly dirty look at the prat. Unfortunately, he was a tougher nut than he looked. He held his left lens up against his left eye and gave me the dirty look right back. In spades. I was about to resort to speech then, but the prat got in first. "I am Rupert Venables," he snaps. "I've been looking for you all afternoon to give you this." And he fetches out 100 quid and counts it into my hand. I was too gobsmacked even to get round to asking how he knew it was me. For that, blame the other motorists. There seemed to be several hundred cars lined up going both ways by then, and they were all gooping. When they saw the money, they began to cheer. I don't think they thought the prat was paying me to move my car either. Oh, I was furious. And Nick was overwhelmed with genuine embarrassment as soon as he heard the name and saw the money, and he was no help at all. We simply got into Dad's car and I drove us away, rather jerkily. After a while I said, between my teeth, "I hope for both our sakes I never meet that prat again. Murder will be done." Nick said, "But the witchy dance has worked." That inflamed my wrath further. "What do you mean, you rat?" "You got £100 with no strings attached," he pointed out. "They're probably forged notes," I said. "What are you going to buy with them?" Nick asked. "Oh, don't ask. I need almost everything you can name," I said. I suppose I was mollified. I know I haven't felt nearly so depressed since.
Chapter 8. Rupert Venables for the Euphorion Archive. Once the various fate lines were moving the right way, I could keep them in hand without too much trouble. I took the blocks off my communications. Instantly the phone rang. The answering machine flashed furiously. 2 computers put up "Messages incoming," and the fax machine put out paper after paper. "Well, it's nice to be needed," I said to Stan. About half the stuff waiting was requests or inquiries from the software and games companies I work for. 2 recorded calls were from Magids elsewhere in the world, wanting to know why I'd let the beef crisis get so much out of hand. I swore. I hadn't realised it had. And it was too late to do anything by then. The current phone call was a girl I know in Cambridge who wanted to know why I hadn't been seen or heard of since Christmas. I told her an old friend had died and left me a lot of unfinished business.
"That's right. Blame me,"
growled the voice of that same old friend from behind me. One of the computers was full of regular email. I let it wait and turned to the other. It was my channel for Magid business and wouldn't wait. Months can pass without Magid communicating with Magid, but when they do communicate, there is an urgent need to know. The first message was from my brother Will. "What's happening? Thule is swamped with refugees from Corophonic worlds." The next was from a Magid called Zinka on the other side of the Empire from Will. "Did you know Corophonic 10 and 12, i.e. Erath and Telf, have declared independence and are making warlike noises at my lot?" The third message said much the same, only about Corophonic 9 and 7. The fourth was from my brother Simon. "Rumours here that the Corophonic Empire is breaking up. Is this intended? If not, do you need help? Intended or not, it seems hard on the people there." I said to Stan, "Well, is it intended?"
Probably,
he replied. Gloomily, I went through the faxes. 2/3 of them were from General Dacros. Typically, he said nothing about war or world seceding from the Empire. To him, this was military business and nothing to do with a Magid. The first few faxes were jubilant. He thought he was on the track of Naros. He had found him. Through Naros, he now had a line on the Babylon heirs. By the 6th fax, he had found 2 more people claiming to be Naros, and the number of putative heirs had trebled. After that, it was exponential. Lost emperors had poured in on him while I was otherwise engaged. Hundreds of them, and several score Naroses. The latest fax said, "I've weeded it down to 8 men who may possibly be Naros. The Empire would appreciate your help in this." "What do you think I should do?" I said to Stan.
Lad, I'm supposed to be advising you about sponsoring a new Magid, not about this, he answered. What do you think?
"I think," I said slowly, trying to get at the right gut feeling on this, "that the Empire is breaking up as was intended all along, and this is why they always put the newest Magid onto it. He or she will make mistakes. I've made mistakes. I could have saved that poor sod Timotheo." Okay, Stan. It's done. I won't beat my breast about it any longer. But to judge from the history of this world, when a big empire breaks up, there's usually 1 or 2 last rulers at the head of it who are either very weak or very young to
sort of guide it down a drain,
Stan said. "Exactly," I said. "So I imagine it's my job to go and pick a Naros, any old Naros, to provide Corophos with a weak ruler." "Stan, this is the part of being a Magid that's not pleasant."
I know, he said. I've done some dirty things too.
I got through to Dacros, sighing rather, and was directed to meet him in a distant suburb of Ephorion. "Just arrive in the road," he said. "Someone would be looking out for me." They were. I stepped out into a chilly, rubble-covered street between 2 rows of small houses, and something went whee past my head and whang into a low brick wall. In fact, whatever it was only missed me because I stumbled on the rubble as I arrived and twisted my ankle. I dived into the garden behind the low brick wall, ankle and all, and crouched there, watching the opposition retaliate. One of their queer beam guns yammered from the next house along from my garden. A flaming bundle with arms but no legs toppled from behind a chimney across the street and plumped down somewhere out of sight. The stench of it streamed across me. I felt ill. I know this kind of thing happens all the time in my world, in most worlds, but I still felt sick and weak and hot round the eyes. I also wondered, with some earnestness, which side was whose. General Dacros settled that by coming out of the next-door house at a run.
"Are you alive there, Magid?"
he shouted. He looked like the big bear in the Goldilocks story, coming out of that small house in a great furry hooded coat, which did not look like army issue. I managed to smile at his bearish look. I rolled onto my knees and shouted back that I was fine. "Sorry about that. We never get to the bottom of the sniper problem," he said. He came and helped me scramble over the wall and hobble into the house. The air smelt horribly of soot. I thought it was from the dead sniper until he helped me through into a back room. This street of houses was built on a hill. Through the back window was what ought to have been a fine view of the city. Now it was a panorama of drifting smoke, high buildings with black, empty windows, 2 ruined bridges, and one stately, climbing cloud of fresh, new grey-blue smoke, with a tower burning in the midst of it. There were bright red flags of flame in the rolls of smoke. "Insurrection in the city," Dacros explained as he put back his furry hood. He had lost weight. He looked far more tired and harrowed than when I had last seen him. "The poorer classes don't like the way everything's getting so expensive." He ran both hands through his black, wriggly hair, which had definitely become thinner since the palace fell. "I can't understand it myself," he added. "Money just seems to be worth nothing suddenly. I've had to issue a list of what things are supposed to cost, bread and so on, with penalties for overcharging, but it's made no difference. Goods just vanished overnight. Some of them have to be sold in secret or bartered, but I don't see why at all." I felt acutely sorry for him. Things like this might be intended, but Dacros was the one who had to cope with it all. "Inflation," I said, "happens when times are unstable. The Emperor kept things stable, if only by consuming most of the valuables he could get his hands on." "Then let's get another Emperor quickly," he said with vehemence. "I'm sick of all these frauds, Magid. Did you know there were over 1,000 of them?" "What have you done with them all?" I asked him. He was surprised, I should wonder. "Executed them." "Bad idea," I said. "They committed treason and fraud," he said. He shrugged. "You can't let people get away with that." "True," I admitted, "but there are alternatives. Talking of which, where are all these other people who say they're Naros?" "Oh, I've got them all lined up for you in the next room and a guard," he said. "I'll have them marched in one by one and you can look them over in here. That suit you?" The straightforward, soldierly method, I thought. It did not surprise me that things were falling to pieces here. Still, I was glad that I was not going to have to travel about the place to interview the claimants. The chances of getting shot seemed quite high, and my ankle still hurt, and both knees where I'd hit the ground. "Wheel them in, then," I said. I do not wish to dwell on those 8 interviews with 8 doomed men. They were all middle-aged and all looked rather imposing. You felt each one of them must have looked in the mirror at some point and thought, "I look like someone the Emperor would trust." One was more or less in rags, one in the soutane of one of the travelling religions, and one seemed to be a minor noble. 2 of them were schoolteachers. God knows why those 2 had put themselves forward, unless it was looking in a mirror, as I said, and knowing they had care of the young, so why not the Emperor's young? The other 3 were a grocer, a farmer, and a poet. All these were mad. So, I discovered after a while, was the preacher. The one in rags was a sly rogue, the noble a blatant one. Most of them looked bewildered or shifty when I asked them about the youngsters supposedly in their charge, though the noble talked glibly of the Emperor's 5 fine boys. It did not take very deep magid work to ascertain that every one of them was another fraud. And the worst of it was I could not bring myself to pretend about any one of them. I looked at Dacros's strained face. I looked at the poet as they marched him away. I could not do this to him. Bugger the Empire. Bugger what was intended. Dacros deserved some honesty. "Sorry," I said, when the door had shut behind the poet's escort. "None of them is Naros. But you could do yourself and the Empire a bit of good if you put them on trial publicly. Let justice be seen to be done. Expose them. Prove the mad ones are mad. Then imprison the sane ones and put the loonies in an asylum." It did no good. Dacros had not been raised to think in this way. He ran his hands through his decreasing hair again and said, "I'm sick of taking strong measures." This did not mean he was considering what I said. It meant that he was going to take the strong measures, and he was fed up with doing it. I think the only reason he didn't order a firing squad out into the back garden straight away was that he guessed I would find it offensive. He added, "I'm only saying this to you, you understand, because I can't say it to anyone else. I'm sick of this whole thing. I keep wondering why I'm the one who's been landed with it, and I want it to stop." "I understand," I said. "Is High Lady Alexandra not with you?" "By all gods, no," he said. "I've sent her away to Thalangia. At least there's no fighting there. I wish I was there too." I was sure he did wish it, since he had chivalrously sent the one person he might have talked to there. "Is it far to Thalangia?" I asked, and wondered whether, if I advised him to go there and let the Empire go to hell, he would listen to me. It was hard to see someone under such stress and not offer help. "Far," he said. "It's 2 worlds eyewards from here, and you can be sure I've got my best unit guarding that world gate. Those gates are so damned vulnerable, you know. The 10th gate went down in seconds." Seeing me looking searchingly at him, he added, "I'm from that world, from Thalangia. Empire policy was that no soldier served in his or her world of origin. I had to come and serve here, but I'd go home tomorrow, except I know damn fine that hell would break loose in Thalangia too, if there was no one at the head of things." "Oh, you're certainly right there," I said soberly. Then, as a last stab at getting things to go the way they were intended, I said, "You could still solve that by taking the throne yourself. Why not?" He gave me a long, expressionless look. It almost seemed a look of hatred. "I'm not even tempted, Magid. There's men on Telf and Anagam with much better families than mine, and they've taken power there, but they've not called it a throne, and they've not dared to call themselves emperor. They know. I know. I'm not tempted." "All right," I said dejectedly. "All right. Then you'll just have to keep on looking for Naros." He sighed deeply. "I know. 8 more dead." 8 more poor fools dead, I told Stan when I arrived home with a black ragged hole in one trouser knee and my hands covered with sooty mud. "7 of them would have been anyway," he said. "You know what the Empire's like." He was listening to Scarlatti harpsichord sonatas that week. He'd gone through all Bach while I worked on the Fate lines. Now it was Scarlatti. Tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. There are over 500 Scarlatti keyboard sonatas. I only had a few. In self-defence, I went and bought Stan 3 more CDs full of them that afternoon, in order to have a different tinkle-tinkle to listen to while I took another look at the Emperor's disc. I was hoping there was a clue to the whereabouts of Naros somewhere on it. The Emperor had brought himself to make this secret record after all. Being Timos the Ninth, he must have felt he was shouting the facts from the palace roof. So why not go a bit further and put in all the facts? Even he must have realised that he might not be there to explain the programme. I had hopes that there might be something hiding behind the lists. There was an awful lot of space left of that disc, but there really seemed to be nothing. And the darn thing was designed as a loop. Like the continuum itself, it kept bringing you back to the beginning. Babylon, I thought uneasily. First you got the graphics, with the world arranged like isobars, waving from one configuration to another, and then, superimposed on these, the semi-animated drawings of men, women, and centaurs of both sexes. The drawings were all in side view and had, as I said, the look of having been taken from photographs of real people. I stopped each one and studied it, but I was none the wiser. They were all different unknown beings, except that two, a human girl and a young female centaur with rather similar features, occurred twice. But this seemed to be because the programmer had slightly botched the loop and put them in at both start and finish by mistake. The girl and the centaur woman both had the strong arched nose and the almond eyes you find on Greek vases and Minoan wall paintings. But this told me nothing, except perhaps that the graphics had stylized the real picture to conform with the fashion of beauty. Funny to think that the Coryphonic Empire was already flourishing when Greece and Minos were new. High time it broke up, really. I froze each of the linear, isobar-like worlds then, and looked each one up laboriously in my Magid database. They were a loop too, starting randomly with a different empire world each time, and making a circuit of the empire and 41 neighbouring worlds, Iwoods and Naywoods both. Apart from the fact that I incidentally learnt the Coryphonic isobars for Earth, this told me nothing. "I give up," I said to Stan. "I think that's what you're supposed to do," he said. Tinkle, tinkle. All this put me in such a pessimistic mood that I was quite surprised when my fate lines started to draw in beautifully. They drew in all through the rest of March, just as I had planned. At least I got something right, I thought, after NATO stepped in and sorted out the former Yugoslavia, and my Croatian candidate came to light manning a gun emplacement in the mountains there. Cornelius Punt returned to Holland. Fisk came out of her retreat, or clinic, or whatever, and seemed to be making plans to come to Britain soon, and my remaining British candidate flew in from Tokyo a week before Easter. When Rick Corrie, or one of his colleagues, sent me a sheaf of updates on the convention, I began to think I had wrought better than I knew. Mervyn Thurles actually figured in it, as hopefully making a guest appearance. The rest of the stuff was almost too strange to contemplate, but I hoped I could make sense of it once I was there. Almost the only other part I understood was the statement that the guest of honour was now confirmed to be world-acclaimed writer Ted Mallory, the Grand Master of Black Humour. For some reason, the name rang no bells with me. I went into Cambridge and bought a paperback by him called Shadowfall, and fell asleep over it repeatedly. I was preoccupied at that time with a premonition. This told me I needed Stan with me in Wanchester, and Stan couldn't leave my house. We experimented. He could not go out through the front door at all. He could go a foot or so beyond the back door, but not as far as the barn. At the sides of the house, he tended to get sucked back in through the windows. We gave up experimenting the day Mrs. Gibbs arrived to find me leaning out of my bedroom window, calling to empty air, "Where are you now, Stan?" I don't think she heard the croaked reply of, "Round near your car. Oh, bugger." But we didn't want to take any more chances. "This is ridiculous, Stan," I said, when Mrs. Gibbs had safely gone, leaving the house scented with bleach and detergent. "The upper room sent you back expressly to help me choose your replacement, but they won't let you come and do it. Do you think you could go back and point this gently out to them?" "I could try," Stan husked, after one of his unhappy pauses. "They don't sort of think in these human terms, though, do they? As far as they're concerned, I'm back and that's it." "Go and explain," I said. "I know I'm going to need you." "Precog?" he asked. "Yep," I said. I had absolutely no doubt. "All right then," he said. "But I may be away for some time, I warn you. It may take an appeal to higher up, not to speak of the way time goes odd that far outside the continuum." And before long, Stan was gone. It was a slow fading, nothing sudden. By mid-afternoon, the Scarlatti tinkled to a gentle stop, and the house felt empty. For the rest of that day, I enjoyed the sense of peace enormously. It was a relief not to have an invisible presence likely to look over your shoulder, whatever you happened to be doing. It was a relief not to sense silent disapproval at my work on behalf of the Empire. Above all, it was a relief not to have to listen to Scarlatti all the time. The next day, I tried to enjoy the same feeling of relief, and even told myself I was enjoying it. The following day, the Wednesday before the convention, I couldn't settle to anything. I told myself I was nervous of going to this strange gathering to make a selection on which the future of world depended, but it wasn't that. It was Stan's absence. On Thursday morning, I sat having breakfast and feeling truly desolate. It seemed to me that I'd lost Stan, finally and forever, by my own insistence. Them up there don't like you trying to change their decisions, which never seems to stop us Magids trying, but there you go. They tend to say, if you don't like it, you can do without, and turn their backs on you. I opened my newspaper, but I couldn't concentrate on it. The back door opened. Icy wind blew in. I whirled round. I don't know what I expected. Stan, in some way more incarnate, I suppose. And I hoped the smile of delight and welcome didn't freeze on my face too obviously when I saw it was only Andrew. He was standing there, on my threshold, with that tranced look again. Damn, I thought, and told myself I should have been expecting this. Andrew had somehow got himself tied in with the other fate lines. He had been bound to turn up. I'm sorry, Rupert. I need you to drive me again, he said. And I'm sorry too, Andrew, I told him. I can't. Not today. Not till Tuesday. I'm going to be away till then, leaving this morning. But come in and have some coffee anyway. Andrew advanced a step, then stopped. Where are you going this time? Wanchester, I said. For a conference. Convention. Andrew stood there with that air he has of consulting parts of his brain so distant that it takes time to reach them. Then he smiled, and his face looked intelligent again. I'll come with you to Wanchester, he said. Thanks. Andrew, I said, truly exasperated, this is a convention for readers of fantasy, and you have to book in advance. That doesn't sound like your cup of tea, he remarked. It's not mine either, but I'd like to see round Wanchester. You can drop me off in the centre of town somewhere. I shan't be in the way. All right, I said. What else could I say? I'm aiming to start at 12:30. I'll be there, he said, and went out and shut my back door, cutting out the icy blasts of wind to my relief. It had been an unusually cold spring. April had come in with snow. I poured myself some coffee that had cooled considerably, despite Andrew's patent pot, and muttered things about Andrew as I tried to drink it. Stan's voice said, He was a fool not to have some of that coffee. It smells good. I wish I could have some. Stan, I said. They let you come. With conditions, Rupert, with conditions, he said. They'll let me come with you, but I shall be bound to your car, just like I am to this house. When you want to talk to me, you're going to have to come and sit in the car. Why? What are they afraid you'll do? I said. Haunt people? It's not that, lad. Wanchester's one of the really potent nodes, and they don't want any more trouble than they can help. They're pretty nervous about you choosing it as it happens. They say things could blow up in your face if you're not careful. I got torn off a strip for letting you choose it. They said I should have reminded you of your Roman law, and I said I couldn't, could I? When I'd forgotten it myself. It wasn't, Stan said, a comfortable meeting. I should have remembered Roman law too. Any town whose name ends in Chester will have been an ancient Roman camp, and the Romans always built these on nodes if they could. It was like plugging into the PowerPoints of the country they were conquering. Roman survey teams had augurs with them as a matter of course, and most of these could divine a node at least as readily as a magid can. I have always suspected that their chief survey augur may have been a magid. He was so accurate. And if there was a choice between one site with a lesser node and another with a greater, you can be sure he chose the latter. Ah, well, I said. It's too late now. We'll just have to be careful.
At least I've got a sound system in the car. Let's get you a stack of Scarlatti tapes.
Chapter 9. Marie Mallory's Thorne Lady Directory. Further extracts. 1. I haven't had the Thorne Lady dream for 2 weeks now. The £10 notes were genuine. I have been renovating my appearance with them. I had my hair cut and bought some clothes. Some of my old clothes were so terrible that I wasn't even going to take them round to Oxfam, until Nick said he didn't approve of throwing away clothes, because there had to be people worse off than me, so why not mix them with a bag of things he had grown out of? And I was glad I did. I found a really good leather jacket in Oxfam for only £5. I suppose it was too small for most people, but it looks good on me. And I've kept my old specs as a spare, even though I can hardly see through them since I've been wearing the new ones. I hadn't realised how much my eyes had changed since I was 16. 2. Uncle Ted has been making the air loud with grumbles and indecision. It seems he was invited to a conference of some kind. Last year, he says, when it didn't seem real, and for all he knew the world would end before a year as improbable as 1996 ever occurred. And now it's only a week or so away, and he doesn't want to go. At least once a day he thinks of a new excuse for not going.
I shall ring up and tell them Marie's got meningitis,
was his latest one. Don't be silly, dear, Janine says. She says that each time. You're a guest of honour. You'll let them down terribly if you cancel now. Janine is very keen for him to go because she wants to bask in reflected glory, and she's already got new clothes for it. Nick wants him to go because he's going to fill the house with his role-playing game friends while they're away. I am the only one who's neutral.
Not cancel it, Uncle Ted said. They want me to confirm that I'm going. They keep asking. They're getting quite neurotic about it, if you ask me, but of course I can't go if Marie's ill.
I refuse to fake meningitis, I said.
But you don't understand, Uncle Ted howled. It's interrupting my life. It's interfering with my work. If I have to go and say things about the way I write, I shall end up thinking I mean them and not be able to write at all.
You always enjoy conventions once you get there, Janine persuaded. You meet a lot of people. You sell a lot of books. At this point, I went away to a lecture. Robbie never goes to things where people just talk, so it was safe. And when I came back in the evening, rather depressed again, Janine had won, but at a cost. Uncle Ted had confirmed he would go to the convention on condition he was bribed with a weekend in Scotland playing golf. This doesn't count as interrupting his life, apparently, and Janine is a very keen golfer too. So off they both went, leaving me in charge of Nick as an experiment. Usually when they go away, they park Nick with one of Janine's friends, but now they can use me. It's just like the way Janine always used me when we were small. She left a list as long as my arm of things I had to do pinned to the kitchen board. I feel like Cinderella. 3. The whole thing was a disaster. For one thing, I can't cook. And anyway, I draw the line at cooking for 7, so Nick did it. He ignored all Janine's lists and Janine's freezer menus and made several hundredweight of spaghetti. For another thing, Nick decided to have a dry run for the convention weekend and invited all his friends. For a third thing, they got bored with role gaming and had a party in the living room instead. Nick wasn't about to have a mess in his basement, not he, so they used the living room and invited more friends, and everything was rather noisier than the sort of thing I'd left Aunt Irene's to avoid. Aunt Irene's kids aren't into pop music yet. I never thought I'd miss anything about her house. And for the fourth and worst thing, the weather in Scotland was lousy, and Janine and Uncle Ted came back after a day. They arrived about an hour after I'd come down from the attic and read the riot act. I mean, enough is enough. Even more of my fellow students don't get as drunk as those kids were. I was standing on the stairs, bawling orders, sarcasm and abuse, while great big lads ran humbly about with empty bottles, carpet cleaner, pans of broken glass, sleeping bags, disinfectant, and the furniture they'd moved to other places. I still wonder how I'd got them so thoroughly cowed. They were all a foot taller than me, but I was furious. I knew I was the one who'd get the blame, and Nick had promised me that nothing like this would happen. And the mess was, or had been, phenomenal. Even then, the whole house smelt of sweaty teenage boy, with detergent, alcohol and disinfectant coming in as poor seconds. I raved, and broke off sharpish when I saw Janine and Uncle Ted in the hall. I thought they were about to turn me into the street there and then. I swore I saw it in Janine's eye. I had time to visualise myself wrapped in a blanket, shivering in a shop doorway along with Bristol's other homeless, and not even a dog to provoke the pity of passers-by, when I realised that, by some miracle, most of the abuse was not being directed at me. Nick's friends were kicked out almost instantly, but they had homes to go to, so that was all right, and I had to help Nick clean up the rest of a mess I hadn't made, but that was all right too. And it was Nick that Uncle Ted went for. I hadn't realised what a sense of justice Uncle Ted has. Janine made one or two efforts to stand in front of Nick and blame me, but they were not her best efforts, until she went into the kitchen and found it draped in pasta and recognised Nick's touch. Then she went, "Poor Marie." She went, "Marie's not up to this sort of responsibility." She went, and then she joined Uncle Ted in shouting at Nick. I let the injustice of that go. I was so relieved still to have a roof over my head. To hear Janine, you'd think she hadn't heard a word of my Sergeant Major act on the stairs. And I'd got it all more or less under control by the time they came home. Nick was in deep shit for nearly 24 hours. Much of it was Janine or Uncle Ted snapping criticisms of every single thing he did or said, which form of nagging Nick avoided any time he wanted by going to ground in his basement. But some of it was Uncle Ted angrily totting up how much of his whiskey Nick and his friends had drunk and demanding to be paid for it. For some reason, this was the part that truly upset Nick. That boy doesn't know he's born. He's had to sell 2 CDs to pay for the booze, and he was nearly in tears over it. I kept out of the way of all of them as much as I could. So this Monday evening I was quite shattered to find I was being punished along with Nick. We are both being made to go to this thing of Uncle Ted's over Easter. The injustice, the iniquity, the pettiness. It's Janine. Janine sticks to her line of me not being cut out to look after Nick. She won't even trust me with the empty house while they're away. I ask you. It's not as if I'd invited my friends in. And Uncle Ted says,
"Nick's proved he's not responsible enough to be left with anyone. He's going to stay in Wanchester under my eye, and you, Marie, are to come to keep Nick off drink, drugs and smashing the furniture while I'm busy doing my act."
I protested. Janine said, "Well, dear, you have got a certain amount to prove, you know." Uncle Ted said autocratically,
"There's no argument. She's rung up and booked you in, both of you. You come and keep Nick in order, Marie, or you can find somewhere else to live. It's a simple choice."
Damn! And I'd hoped to earn some money over Easter, enough to afford to go and see my dad in hospital at least. I'm divided between thinking that Uncle Ted so hates being a guest artiste that he's determined we shall be miserable with him, and thinking that Janine is the one who wants me there, bored and penniless and running round after Nick. She looked so smug while Uncle Ted delivered his ultimatum. I suppose she wants to queen it and not have to spend time making sure Nick survives in the mornings. And damn again! I had the Thorne Lady dream again on Monday night. The woman in the bush told me to search my mind and work out why I couldn't cope with normal life. Cheek, I call it, sitting in a bush and making other folk feel one down. 4. End of term! Perhaps I shall be a philosopher when we start again, Robbie. Sometimes Uncle Ted can be quite reasonable. These last few days, he's been really woebegone, sitting in his study composing what he calls his state-of-the-art to the masses speech, which he has to give at the convention next Sunday. Every so often, he trudges out, grabs whichever of us happens to be passing, and demands to be told a word that's on the tip of his mind, only he's forgotten it, or a joke. Any joke. Janine just shrugs. Nick supplies jokes. I seem to be so good at coming up with the word or thing that Uncle Ted wants that he started to call me his peripatetic encyclopedia. Not the snappiest of job descriptions. The last time he did it, "Marie, for God's sake, that constellation with the belt and the sword, fellow who rode on the dolphin's back, you know." And I told him, Orion. He stopped as he was going back into his study and wrote Orion on the back of his hand so as not to forget it again. Then he said, "Marie, do you have any money at all?" "No," I said. "The £100 is gone now, and not for worlds am I going to go and beg Robbie for what I paid for our flat. Not until next term," I added hastily, remembering I am supposed to pay Uncle Ted rent. It wasn't quite a lie. After all, some other prat might make me a present of another £100, who knows? "Then you'll need some for the convention," he said. "They can be quite expensive." And he gave me this wad of money. When I counted it, it was £75, all he had in his back pocket. Then he went on, I nearly fainted, "And I'll pay your petrol if you're driving there." Then he rushed back into his study before I could even start to thank him, muttering, "Orion, Orion." Well, well. Poor Uncle Ted. He's so dreading making this speech that he seems to have forgiven me for Nick's little caper. He's forgiven Nick, too. Nick has his usual lavish pocket money. I shall go and buy a spare pair of jeans. Then I can wash these I have on. 5. Poor Uncle Ted. On the Thursday, I started writing this when it was still Thursday, but it's turned into Friday now. He was pale and trembling and kept having to dash to the loo. He couldn't pack. At least, he did pack, but he left all the clothes out except for a sweater and half his pyjamas, and Janine had to do it again for him. He left his speech all neatly piled up on his desk and got into the car without it. Janine had her hands so full of him that she seemed quite relieved when I said I was driving myself to Wanchester in Dad's car. I didn't mention Uncle Ted had paid for the petrol. Nick promptly said that he'd come with me. I think Master Nick hoped or thought that this meant we'd be skiving off and staying at home. But apart from the fact that I'd promised Uncle Ted that I'd faithfully listen to his speech and applaud it at the end, I was intrigued. I wanted to know what kind of event could make him so terrified. Well, now I know, to some extent. Nick and I set off about an hour after his parents. This was because I filled Dad's car with all my worldly possessions. Nick wanted to know why. Other people have security blankets, I told him. I have a car filled with everything I own. I didn't like to confess to him that I keep having this strong feeling that I am going to be homeless after Easter. No, worse than that. It feels as if the world is going to end then, and I have to carry everything around with me and make sure that when I'm crouching in a cave after Armageddon, I at least have my computer and my vet case to hand, both of which will be very useful, of course. I don't know what's making me feel this way. It could be the Thorne Lady dreams. It's not my dad. I've rung him and he swears he's improving, except I know he's saying that to make me feel better. It's just that I have this gloomy conviction that's settled on me like a rainy week. I even phoned Mum about it. She was her usual cheery self. "Ah, Marie," she says, "you want to take notice of a premonition like that? I know, because it runs in my family too. My mother foretold the very day and hour she was going to die, and she wasn't even ill when she told me." Thanks a bunch, Mum. Anyway, I loaded in my stuff and Nick got into the car saying, "I won't say anything. My father made me promise not to keep winding you up." "What do you mean, winding me up?" I said, starting the car with a roar and a swoop. It always seems to do that when I'm a trifle irritated. "He means the way we usually go on. He calls it sparring for dominance," Nick said placidly. "He doesn't understand that I have to do that, or you'd walk all over me." "Oh, spare me," I said. It took me half the drive to simmer down after that one. Uncle Ted no doubt meant well, and I knew he'd had a private talk with Nick yesterday, but Nick had no business to spill the beans to me. It annoyed me even more that I knew Nick had said it on purpose to make me angry instead of gloomy. News for you, Master Nick. A person can be angry and gloomy. That seems to be my permanent state at the moment, and I detest being managed. Arriving in Wanchester didn't exactly improve my state of mind. Nick fetched out the map the convention had sent Uncle Ted, that Janine had photocopied for us after breakfast, and said, "Here it is. Hotel Babylon, right in the middle of town. Easy. Why do you think it's called Babylon? TV show? Burning fiery furnace? Hanging gardens? Go straight ahead here." "What are hanging gardens?" I said, taking the road he pointed at. "It always makes me think of rows of gibbets in a park." "Trees in the air, I think of. Go first right," said Nick. "We'd noticed those," I agreed, going where he said. "Or a furnace. Or a dirty great tower broadcasting in 100 languages. Tower of Babel. That was in Babylon too, wasn't it?" 10 minutes later, we both noticed it. A large sign above the houses that said, "Hotel Babylon." But the town has a one-way system to beat any other town I know, and it took us on past at a distance. I drove on, grinding gears about, and after a while we saw the sign again, going past on the other side. But there was no way to get to it. We saw the cathedral, a shopping precinct, the town hall, and the river. We crossed the river because there seemed no way not to, and next thing I knew, we were entangled in an open space full of long glass arcades like tunnels to nowhere, that Nick identified belatedly as Winmore bus station. Much too late. By that time I was having to back out of the place bonnet to bonnet with a double-decker bus, whose driver was not pleased to see us there. I drew into a bus stop to recover from that. From there we saw the Hotel Babylon sign quite clearly, about 100 metres away, behind the glass arcades. The only way I could see to get there was to drive through the bus station and risk another double-decker bus. "The place is trying to stop us getting to it," I said. "It's like an evil spell. Perhaps I should try driving to it widdershins, the wrong way round the one-way system." "You'll get arrested," Nick said. He was perfectly happy. By this time, he had a map of Wanchester set up on his laptop and was filling in all the places that we passed. The bus station, I saw, had just gone in as Glass Maze with Monsters. "Nick, are you doing this to me on purpose?" I demanded with menace.
"No way! Try turning left at the next lot of traffic lights," he said.
Since a bus was trying to get into the bus stop where we were, I drove on. And after that, I really did feel as if something was trying to stop us getting to the hotel. I said so to Nick after we had accidentally visited a small factory and were doing a brisk tour of the suburbs. I could see we were almost out of town by then. There were fields and bare trees on one side of the road. Nick grinned. "Then we say the spell to stop the spell." Naturally, we both began chanting, "How many miles to Babylon? 70 miles and 10. Can I get there by candlelight? Yes, and back again." And then I felt much better and turned into someone's driveway, and we drove back into Wanchester from the other side. I can hardly describe the hilarious mixture of laughter and misery and anger that I was feeling by then. I said, "And on top of it all, I keep having the Thorne Lady dreams again."
"Why didn't you say?" Nick said. "We should have done the witchy dance for luck in the garden at home. Now we'll have to do it the moment we find a place to stop."
"Are you sure?" I said.
"Positive. Urgently," he said.
In a hilarious, not quite sane way, we both knew it was true. And seconds after Nick spoke, we turned a corner and saw Hotel Babylon standing across the distant end of a great wide street in front of us.
"The spell worked,"
Nick said. "Just as well," I said. "It's going to be dark soon, and I'm not sure how the lights work. Now, conjure me up the car park and we'll get dancing."
"Hey presto,"
Nick said, calmly shutting down his laptop. Sure enough, there was an archway in the wall beside the hotel, labelled Hotel Car Park Guests Only. I turned into it, saying, "Why the hell are you always so lucky, Nick? It's bad for your personality. It's not fair. I've had bad luck ever since I can remember."
"Witchy dance," Nick said, throwing open the door on his side.
So I stopped the car just inside the archway and jumped out too, and we began the dance at once. Step, shuffle, step, hop, hop, step, stop. At every stop, we did the flick, flick, flick and chanted, "Luck, luck, luck." My fingernails have now grown into great long yellow spikes, so the flicking was really satisfying. And it was odd. The car park was pretty well full. I saw Janine's car parked nearest the hotel as I hopped and turned. There was no sign of her and Uncle Ted, but there were people at least half of the other cars and the vans unloading things, suitcases, guitars and video equipment, and most of them barely glanced at us. There was an old man almost beside us where 3 people with waist-length hair and a baby went on unloading bags, bundles and the baby's cot without even looking at us. You got the feeling they saw much odder things than the witchy dance every day of their lives. This was rather encouraging. "Luck, luck, luck!" Nick and I roared and danced and twisted like dervishes. I did hear a car hooting, but I honestly thought it was out in the road. Well, it almost was, because it was halfway through the archway I had blocked by stopping Dad's car. But I didn't notice a thing until its driver came and screamed at us, "Get this load of scrap iron out of my way, you stupid bitch!" Screamed is the right word. He had a thin tenor voice. He had a little pointed beard. His face was mauve, and his nose was pointed too and pinched with fury, so that white marks came and went on the sides of it. Nobody calls me a bitch and gets away with it. Even Robbie only tried it once. I calmly pointed a flick at his mauve face and turned to look at his car. It was a horrible old banger covered with rust, and it was blocking the archway. I could see at least one car angrily backing away from behind it. I looked at Dad's car. True, it was in the way, and it's a bit weather-beaten these days, but nothing to the heap that his was. "Same to you," I said, "in spades, bitch and scrap iron." "Move it," howled Curlybeard. "I am a guest at this convention." "Me too," I said, "for my sins." "I am Mervyn Thurles," he screamed. "Then you need a deed poll," says I. "Can't help you there." He screamed I was a bitch again. I told him, "Once more, my good man, gets you pins in a wax image or worse. I'd do it now and curse you into the bargain, only I'm crossed in love and haven't the energy. Now you get out of my way." I pushed past him, climbed into my car again, and drove with immense dignity to the free space where Nick was now standing, beckoning. Typical Nick, that. Brisk vanishment at the first sign of trouble. Nick waved me into the space with great flourishes to disguise the fact that tears of laughter were pouring down his face. "How is it that this happens every time we do the witchy dance?" I said to him. "This one forgot to pay you," he giggled. "Yes, but it was much more satisfactory," I said. "I actually got a word in edgeways. Several, in fact, this time." That space turned out to be the last one empty. Clever Nick. Mauve Mr. Thurles was forced to back out through the archway and drive away. That gave me great joy. I watched him doing it from under one of my arms while I was unloading the bags with our clothes in from the boot. Chapter 10. From Marie Mallory's Thorne Lady Directory. File 23. We entered into a large space full of suitcases and confusion. People in jeans and T-shirts were rushing everywhere, shouting things like, "Tell Rocker to go straight to the ops room," or "Hasn't Jeddah got those bloody files copied yet?" or simply, "Sly monster," and hugging one another, men and women alike. "Well, well," I said to Nick, "they did build the Tower of Babel here after all." We ploughed our way through it all to the reception desk near the back. I jumped the last clump of suitcases to find Nick saying to the harassed hotel lady at the desk, "We're Nick and Marie Mallory. I think we've got rooms booked here." Someone behind bellowed while Nick was speaking. "The badge machine's broken again, I tell you." Maybe this caused the girl to mishear Nick or something. The girl's neat little brooch said she was Odile, and she had a permanently worried look. She punched things on her computer. "I'm sorry," she said in a foreign accent. "That room is already taken." "It can't be!" I shrieked across the noise. "Anyway, it wasn't one room, it was two." Odile, looking fractionally more worried, punched buttons some more. "Mr. and Mrs. Mallory," she said. "One double room, already taken. That is all there is on the computer. No doubles left. Sorry." "We aren't Mr. and Mrs. Mallory," Nick attempted to explain. And I probably made things worse by adding, "We're cousins. Those Mallorys are his dad and his mum. We want a single room each." "I'm sorry," Odile intoned. "All rooms have been taken by the convention." She obviously hadn't understood a word we said, but we still tried to behave as if she was rational. "We know," we said in chorus. Nick said, quite slowly and loudly, "2 of those rooms are for us." Odile looked blank. She punched more buttons. "One double room for Mr. and Mrs. Mallory is already taken by the convention. Sorry." By this time, we were both leaning rather desperately over the desk, as if we could get through to Odile if we got close to her. Nick said, Look at us. Do we look as if we're married? Odile shot him a blank, worried look. Perhaps where she came from, people do get married at Nick's age. Anyway, she said, "It is in the computer." So I had a go. I said, "Listen, Odile, try single rooms in the name of Mallory, please, as a favour." Without altering her blank, worried look, Odile went back to pressing buttons. The suspense was too much for both of us. We sort of turned away and Nick muttered, "I think she's a robot." "Android, anyway," I muttered back. Then I discovered that the ceiling of the hotel foyer was a mass of mirrors, large and small. The entire confusion of folk was reflected there, upside down, milling about, sort of hanging there, mixed up with trees in urns and piles of suitcases. There were the three people with the baby again, passing the baby chair round from one to another so that they could hug someone they had just met. I could see Nick and me. We rippled from one mirror to another as I moved my head. One tall, dark, good-looking teenage boy, and one short girl who looked surprisingly like a normal human being. It gave me a queer feeling, as if I was reading the future in the sky. It caused an anxious thought to strike me. "Nick," I said. I could see from the ceiling that he was looking at the three with the baby, cautiously and sort of sideways, trying to see which of them was female and which male. It wasn't easy to tell. Two of them could have been either. I jabbed his elbow with my longest fingernail. "Nick, who actually booked our rooms, Janine or Uncle Ted?" "Oh, Mum did," he said. As he said it, a little of the blankness faded from Odile's face. We both spotted it in the ceiling and turned to her eagerly. "Mallory," she said, "the computer has one single room booked for Nick Mallory." "Oh, fun," I said. "Dear Janine." "Look some more," Nick said to Odile. "There should be one for Marie Mallory too." The blankness descended on Odile again, but she pressed buttons. I suddenly couldn't bear to look. I thought I was going to cry. I mean, I know Janine hates me, but to have it publicly demonstrated like this was almost too much. And the thought of driving all the way back to Bristol in the dark was definitely too much. I looked firmly at the ceiling, where the man the three with the baby had been hugging was now moving upside down across the foyer, greeting this person and that. He stood out for his very white T-shirt with a row of large flat badges on it, and he had some sort of equipment clipped to his belt, but his stomach bulged and hid most of his belt. And then he went all blurred. In order not to cry, I rounded on Odile again. She was shaking her head. "Oh, look here," I said. It came out booming. "There has to be a room for me if there's one for Nick. My uncle's guest of honour at this convention. He was told there would be rooms for his family." The man in the white T-shirt came up beside me. "Having trouble," he said. We both jumped. It was odd to find him real, as well as upside down in the ceiling beside my small, shock-headed figure. One of his row of badges said, "Committee," and when I pushed my glasses up my nose, I could see the name beneath that, Rick Corrie. The rest of the badges said things like, "All power corrupts," "But we need electricity," and "Dyslexia rules KO." And the thing clipped to his wide waist was a radiophone. He had a black, streaky beard and a round, pleasant face. "This robot woman thinks I don't have a room booked," I told him. I was ashamed of the angry, booming sob in my voice. "Happens all the time," Rick Corrie said cheerfully. "I'm supposed to be hotel liaison. Let me see what I can do." He pushed me gently aside and started talking rapidly to Odile in a foreign language. Odile face turned from worried robot to the face of a human being, and she began pushing buttons again with a will. Rick Corrie turned to Nick.
"What was your name again? We're trying to get your sister a room next to yours."
"Cousin," Nick said. "I'm Nick Mallory. She's Marie." A great smile split Rick's beard.
"Then you're the great man's family. In that case, we must definitely do a bit of room juggling."
He leant back over the counter and exchanged more foreign talk with Odile. In under a minute, he was turning back and holding a key out to each of us.
"Here you are. Rooms 534 and 535. Just sign these forms and then I'll take you up to register with the convention."
We signed, me at least in a wash of gratitude, and picked up our bags and followed Rick up the nearby stairs. I had a last glimpse of us in the ceiling, looking flurried and glad, and me a shock-headed scramble of legs as I caught up with Rick. "How did you work that?" I said.
"Easy," he said. "I told her to give you a room that someone hadn't turned up to claim."
"But won't he mind?" I puffed. The stairs were short but steep. Rick shrugged his plump shoulders.
"Too bad if he does. He hasn't arrived when he said he would, and the opening ceremony's coming up in half an hour. A lot of the programme items have already started. He's late, or he's not coming and hasn't bothered to cancel."
There were more mirrors at the back of the wide landing the stairs led to. We watched ourselves advance as Nick asked,
"What language did you speak to the robot woman in?" "Finnish," said Rick. "More of an android, really. The hotel hires her cheap because she wants to get programmed in English."
"Then this is the Tower of Babel," I said.
"Yes," he said, feelingly.
We arrived into a crowd on the landing and had to wait our turn at a long table there. He said,
"It's caused a lot of trouble already. The Romanian fans arrived without their luggage, the Russians can't find their interpreter, and the Germans don't like the plumbing. At least the Americans speak English, even if there was a muddle about their rooms. You're not the only ones."
We broke through to the long table then, where a big hand-painted notice said, "Phantasmacon Registration." Several people were sitting behind the table, half hidden by boxes with teddy bears propped against them. Rick Corrie led us up to a blue teddy with a large M under it. A notice hung round the teddy's neck said, "I am Socrates. I heart conventions." I looked it in its mournful button eyes and wished I hadn't. I was not sure I was going to heart anything about this weekend at that stage.
"Mallory,"
Rick Corrie said to the fat girl behind the box. Her badge said Willow, but Rick called her Wendy.
"The rest of the GOH family party, Wendy."
Wendy gave us a hasty smile that lifted her cheeks into lumps like tennis balls, and then lowered the lumps to say to Rick Corrie in a strong, whining voice, "Rick, I hope someone's going to relieve me here soon. I need to get into conclothes for the ceremony."
"Not my problem," Rick told her cheerfully. "Speak to Magnus or Parabola."
Wendy muttered something and searched through hundreds of plastic bags in her boxes. It took her a while because her long hair kept falling over her massive shoulders and she kept stopping to hurl it back. When she at last discovered 2 bags and leant forward, smiling tennis balls again, to hand them round Socrates, her vast bosom pooled on the boxes in cushion-sized lumps. I saw Nick look hastily away. I think he thought she was some kind of cripple. "Here you are," she said. "Programme and breakfast tickets, lucky number and badge. Please wear your badge at all times. We're having trouble with gate crashers." Nick took his bag sort of sideways. I took mine.
"Right," said Rick Corrie. "I'll take you up to your—"
His radio phone began yelling. He unhitched it and listened to the agitated quacking coming out of it with growing dismay.
"But we weren't expecting anyone from Croatia," he said to it.
All right, I'll be down in 2 seconds. Out. He was on one foot, ready to run by then. Hey, you, he said to a pale young man, loitering by the end of the table. You take these two to rooms 534 and 535, will you? I have to go, he said to us. See you at the ceremony. And he left at a sprint, taking the stairs in 3s. The pale young man solemnly held out a hand for my bag. The lifts are just along here, he said. He had hair so fair it was greenish, almost matching the colour of his T-shirt, which had words on it in a strange language. Finnish? I wondered, while he was pressing the lift button for us. I was going to ask, only a tremendous noise broke out behind us. A tenor voice was howling, I insist on satisfaction. I'm a guest at this convention. And other voices were clamouring, trying to soothe it. Luckily, the lift arrived just then. Nick and I both hopped in, and then looked anxiously out as the door slid shut. Sure enough, Mervyn Thurles was leaning over the long table, beard jutting, mauve with rage again. I bet I know what's happened, I murmured to Nick. Not your fault, he murmured back as the lift started upwards. I am Dutch, remarked the young man. My name is Kees. That is spelt Kees. It is short for Cornelius. And he spelt that too. Oh, I said. Ah, Nick said. There was a mirror in the lift too. It showed us both staring cautiously at Dutch Kees. I'm Marie, I said. This is Nick. Pleased to meet you, said Kees. You are not old Nick, and I am not a nutcase. There is a Dutch joke for you. Ah, I said. Oh, said Nick. We were both glad when the lift stopped and the door slid away to show a board with arrows. It said, left, rooms 501 to 556, rooms 557 to 501, right. I think we can find out. Hang on, Nick said. He took another look at the notice. Precisely, Kees said smugly. It is not so simple. Also, a committee member has told me to take you, and I must do what he says. I am a gopher. Gopher? We both said together as we all turned left. Oh, I get you, I said. You go for... But Kees told us anyway. He was that kind. It is spelt Gopher, and it means people who fetch and carry and whom the con cannot do without. We pushed through swing doors and went down a long, long corridor. People who run errands, he said. No doubt it began as a joke, meaning go for this or go for that, but now it is an institution round here. We turned left again and went down another corridor. Kees said, at Phantasmacon, it is also an institution that the gophers are known as hobbits. We turned another left-hand corner. There were mirrors at each of these corners. They produced a very odd effect, a brief illusion of us coming and going and wheeling elsewhere. As we wheeled round the fourth left-hand turn, I tore my eyes off the mirrors and said politely, Your English is very good. Thank you, said Kees. I am rather proud of it. The numbers on the doors we passed now said 523, 524, 525. It can't be much further, surely, Nick said. You may be wrong, said Kees. This is a very peculiar hotel. I think it is straight out of Escher. Escher was a Dutch artist, you know, who drew things so that they look as if they go up when they go down, but when you look closely, they do both, and you cannot tell. Yes, said Nick. The numbers on the doors were in the 40s now, and believe it or not, we turned left again, and I really think that was 5 angles by then. Nick said uncertainly,
We'll be back at the lift again at this rate, won't we? I think not, said Case. Yes, in most hotels. But here you can turn 5 corners and still not make a square.
And you know, he was right. Nick muttered things about this building must be built in a sort of Greek key pattern, and it wasn't possible. But I'm here to say it was. We turned left yet again and had to walk most of the way down a long corridor lined with red carpet before we came to room 534. I felt it was quite lucky that room 535 was next to it. At that rate, it could have been anywhere. All the same, we were both quite sure that Case had taken us the long way round and that the lifts must be just round the next mirrored corner. We suspected another Dutch joke, and we each decided, quite independently, to go that way when we went to look for this opening ceremony. Meanwhile, Nick tried to get even with Case. Case announced that, well, he would love us and leave us now. Nick held the door of his room propped open on one foot and leant backwards out of it.
I hope you don't mind me asking, he says, very serious and polite, but what does your T-shirt say?
Case looked smugly down at his narrow chest.
It says, he said, I am a hobbit.
He bowed and walked away.
In Elvish, he added as he left.
That round was Case's, hands down. We didn't stay long in our rooms, just long enough for me to look in the placky bag I'd been given. It had a smiley face and Phantasmacon on the outside and a massive bump on the inside. One item of which was a whole glossy magazine with a story by Uncle Ted in it. But there were appeals for AIDS victims and ads for things called swords and attire, and anyway, I found the badge with my name on it and threw the rest away. In this, I was less than clever. Master Nick had had the sense to notice that the scruffiest bit of paper was in fact the programme to this madhouse. It was all organised in columns labelled Parallel Universe 1, Mallory World, Home Universe, and so on. And it made not more sense to me than the hotel corridors. But Nick had it worked out. He said the opening ceremony was in Home Universe, and that was the first floor in the big function room. So we tried to go there. We went the other way, expecting to get to the lifts any moment. And we didn't. I lost count of the corners we turned, but I remember Nick saying they were all right angles, which meant that by now we had walked round 2.5 squares at least, and it didn't make sense. I said we ought to have met ourselves or walked into a new dimension or something, but all we did was get to the lifts, in the end. Downstairs, it ought to have been simple. There were even notices with arrows saying, Home Universe. But I suppose the trouble was that we didn't know what we were looking for. And everyone seemed to have gone by then, so we couldn't ask. Anyway, we wandered for a bit until we came to an official-looking door, and we opened the door and looked round it. We found a small, rather dark room where a dozen or so people were clustered round a blackboard. Every single one of them wore a long robe with a cowl to it, like mad monks. You couldn't see any of the faces at all, not even the face of the one who was writing on the board and turning to explain to the others. He was writing symbols that made my stomach feel queer after only one glance. Really queer. At the moment we looked in, he was saying, For the strongest effect, you should visualize all these written in fire on a background of flames. Nick and I, with one accord, backed out and closed the door very gently. After that, I let fly a giant burp because of the funny way my stomach was feeling. Which universe do you think they were in? I whispered.
Somewhere very alien, Nick said decidedly.
We continued our search by going along to the next door and opening that. I was saying, if Uncle Ted was wanting to punish us, I think he's succeeding, and Nick was agreeing, but not quite in the way when we found we were in a vast hall full of faces, all turning to look at us. We were there. It was like a bad dream, but it was the opening ceremony right enough. We slid into the back row of seats with hot faces. It was just starting. There was Uncle Ted in the act of taking a seat on the far-off platform, along with 10 or so other people we didn't know, and Janine being shown to a seat in the front row. As we sat down, a glossy-faced, youngish man in a T-shirt with a great deal of wriggly blonde hair sprang up and began welcoming everyone to Phantasmacon. But he'd only got as far as, "Pleasure it is to have with us as guest of honour," when the door that end burst open and a high tenor voice cried out, I'm sorry. I know you're just starting and I haven't come to stay." And Mervyn Thurles rushed in and rushed up onto the platform. "I just wanted to tell you it's a disgrace," he said. "I'm a guest of this convention and you've put me in the station hotel." Half the people on the platform sprang up. Rick Corrie sprang up too, out of the audience. He bounded to the platform, seized Thurles by one arm and hurried him aside, where he talked to him in urgent whispers. Thurles was not placated. In the end, Rick hurried him outside and the door banged on Thurles, shouting, "I don't care! I insist on a taxi!"
"That was Mervyn Thurles," said the blonde, glossy man gravely.
The audience, to my surprise, clapped and cheered. A lot of people laughed. They were like that, the people at this convention, surprisingly good-humoured and in a holiday mood, as if they had come to enjoy themselves as much as listen to writers talk about books. I spent the rest of the very boring ceremony looking around at them. My first thought was that the police would be in trouble here if there had been a crime and they needed descriptions of the man on the scene. About 9/10 of the men had beards and wore glasses. Otherwise, there were people of all ages, from the eccentric-looking old man with the hearing aid to the long-haired people's baby, which had to be carried outside crying around then, and quite a number of children. There was also more than a fair share of achingly glamorous young females. But there were also more than usual numbers of Wendy-shaped fat ones. There was a whole row of them, male and female, just along from Nick and me, and I stared fascinated at their huge, tightly stretched T-shirts, each with something clever or weird written on it. They made me feel pleasantly slender for a change. The men were none of them my types, fat or thin. I don't go for beards and glasses. But I thought I could quite fancy one or two of the willowy types in paramilitary gear, or the dark one in black leather and mirror shades, sitting beside Uncle Ted on the platform. But I know what really struck me. The hall was full of people I'd like to get to know. An unusual feeling for sulky, solitary me, that. This feeling extended particularly to the large sprinkling of shy-looking middle-aged ladies, much to my surprise. I found myself looking at the skinny, greying one nearest. She was in a bright patchwork jacket, and thinking that whatever she did for a job, it bored her, and she didn't get on with her workmates, so she clearly lived a passionate life among books instead, and I would have liked to talk to her about some of the things we'd both read. By the end of the ceremony, I was thinking that the punishment was not really a punishment at all. Ha ha! That was before Janine swept down on Nick with, "Come along, darling, we're going to eat with the other guests," and whisked him away. I was left on my own for the rest of the evening. It was a bit like your first day at school or college. I didn't know anyone, and I had no idea what to do, and everyone was charging and bustling around me, knowing exactly where they were going and who they were going with. So I pushed my specs up my nose, squared my shoulders, and went to my car to bring my most valued things up to my room. I did the first load unhindered, or unhindered by anything except the weird effect of those mirrors on the corners of the corridors. And there were 5 right-angle corners. I counted. There and back, going to the lifts both ways. And I was standing, waiting for the lift to go down for the next load, when I happened to look back at the nearest corner, and I saw the most fabulous man I'd ever seen in my life. Tall and Nordic and slim, deep-set eyes, no beard, no glasses, just staggering. To die for, as Robbie's bint Davina would say. He was just at the junction, reflected in all the mirrors, so I could see he was fabulous from every angle. And at first, I thought he was coming towards me to the lifts. My knees felt weak at the thought of actually sharing the lift with him. But he was really going the other way. The 4 images of him I could see wheeled to the right, I think it was to the right, and walked off the mirrors. I was smitten enough by the sight of him to run back to that corner to get another look at him as he walked away. He had the sexiest walk. But he must have gone into one of the nearest rooms, because by the time I had tottered over there, the cross corridor was empty. All I saw were multiple versions of myself, looking small and lost. Then the lift came, and I sprinted back and got in it. Further mirror, showing Marie looking glum and frustrated. Still, I'm bound to see him again. And I ask myself what has become of my feelings for Robbie that I could be so knocked sideways by a total stranger. But it was all right. As soon as I looked inside me, I was as raw as ever in the place where Robbie was torn away. Yet I still feel weak thinking of that fabulous man. I must be very odd. I was coming back through the foyer with another load, watching the image of myself in the ceiling dangling bags and clutching my VDU to my tummy, when I was accosted by the Dutch Case. "Let Case take your case. This is what I am here for," he cries, and whips my vet's bag out of my straining fingers. "Where to?" And he set off for the lift anyway. I went after him at a panting trot. Dad proudly gave me that bag, and it's never been any real use, bless him, and I didn't trust Case with it one bit. When we got to the lift, he tried to wrestle the VDU out of my grip too, but I hung on to it, and he only got the carrier bag with the flexes in. "Let me take it all. I am an excellent beast of burden," he said. I said, no, I could manage the rest, thank you. So we went up in the lift protesting at one another, and then he said, was I a computer freak? And I said, no, I just used it. "But I am a great freak in all sorts of ways," he said. I believed him. "I can do tricks with viruses," he says. "I once made every computer in Rotterdam display the same nonsense rhyme on the stroke of midday." He recited the rhyme in Dutch. It took 4 floors. "Very clever," I said. We left the lift and started the trudge round the 5 right angles. "We will set up your computer, and then you will eat with me," he said. "No thanks," I said. "But you must. I will make it a Dutch treat," he said beguilingly. "Dutch joke." "No money," I said. "But I have no money either," he exclaimed. "So, let us have a Barmecide's feast and drink warm water together." "I have work to do," I lied. When we got to my room, he tried to stay and set up the computer. I was quite determined he wouldn't. I didn't trust him not to fill my software with Dutch jokes. I didn't trust him, period. I more or less kicked him out. He leant back in round the door and smiled meltingly. "Such a strong mind," he said.
Call on me if you change it. I am room 301.
Go away, I said. After I set up the computer, I was hungry. I found the service stairs, just in case, oh God, another Dutch joke, it's catching, was hanging about by the lift. I don't know what it is about that boy, or perhaps I do. And anyway, I've been crossed in love, and Case is a bit of a come-down after that fabulous Nordic type. So I went down the stairs and found the dining room. The prices posted on the board outside made my hair curl. So I went to the bar, hoping they did sandwiches. I was afraid I was going to have to starve until breakfast. Mirrors again there, too, not only behind the bar, but the whole end wall, so the place looks huge. They did the most expensive ham rolls I have ever eaten. I bought half a pint of orange juice and found a place to sit. That bar was crowded with strange conversations. Some Americans next to me were avidly discussing something called a shared world. I thought it was something we had no choice about sharing. And someone just behind me kept saying, "It's no skin off his nose if I filk his filk." A highly hairy man in front of me was complaining, "It's his inker that lets him down every time." Then I heard a girl screaming out up by the mirror end, "Come to the gopher's orgy, I'm just starting it now," to which several people yelled, "Oh, shut up, Tallulah." I turned to see who was shouting, and saw, of all people, that prat Venables. I don't mean he was shouting, he wasn't. He was sitting on a tall bar stool, chatting to the blonde, glossy man. Because of the mirror up that end, I had him in front and back view, so there was no mistake. From behind, there was the long, smooth head, and in the mirror was his long, smooth face with the gold-rimmed specs. And the face was just turning away from me with much the same horror on it that I was feeling seeing him. At least he wasn't wearing a suit this time, but he had on a smart suede jacket and a pristine polo neck sweater. Altogether, he was out of place. I'd have bet large odds he'd ironed his jeans. "Ouch," I said, and jerked my eyes away. This was lucky, because it showed me in the mirror that Rick Corrie was standing doubtfully looking down at me. "Oh, hello," I said to him.
"Hello, is nobody looking after you?" he said. "Can I get you a drink?"
I said, "Yes, please, I'd like a vodka, if he would." He looked so dismayed that I realised he thought I was Nick's age. A lot of people do. "I'm 20, I told him. "Honestly, do you want to see my birth certificate?"
"I think I don't want you to push your specs up your nose at me like that," he said. "I can see it means trouble."
Then he fetched himself massive amounts of beer, and me a vodka, and we talked for a bit. He loves Uncle Ted's demons too. I said my favourite was the blue three-legged one that kept pushing its face through bedroom walls to see what people did in bed. His favourite one was the one that was just a pool of saliva that took the skin off your ankles. And we both agreed that the demon that came up at you out of the loo was a bit too close to real fears for comfort. Then his beeper went. He left his beer and pelted away to deal with the crisis. I was sorry, but I could see that in ordinary life, Rick Corrie would arrange to be called away by beepers too. He was one of those people who find it hard to talk to anyone for very long. I think a lot of the people here may be like that. But it was a shame, because it left me to the mercy of an awful woman who was just the opposite. While I was talking to Rick, I noticed her drifting up to the Americans in the next seats, and that they all said, "Hi, Tanziane," and then turned their backs on her. I can see why. And the moment Rick left, this Tanziane creature pounced on me. "Tell me all about it," she said. "I'm Tanziane, and I'm a healer." When I stared at her, rather, She added, "Your aura is one big grey psychic cloud. Let me give you a back rub. It'll stop you being so sad and tense." And she pushed me forward in my chair and started sort of kneading at my shoulders. I didn't like it. Neither did I like her. She was the big grey psychic cloud, if you like. She was biggish and plumpish, and her face somehow retired behind her large, probing nose. And she was dressed in something orange and shapeless, covered with millions of little cold, dangling pieces of yellow metal that jangled when she pounced, and I didn't like that either. I wriggled away from her probing cold hands and said I didn't feel like a back rub just now. "A hand massage, then," she exclaimed, diving and jingling round in front of me. "I'm real good at massaging hands. It's the most soothing experience in the world. You'll love it." And blow me down, she grabbed my hands and started squeezing and bending them about. I took them away and sat on them. I said I was all right. "Thanks, Tanziane." "You need to sort out your sex life," she cried. "You're British. That's what's wrong with you. I know. Let me set you straight." Then she leant over me and talked and talked. After a while, I didn't listen. Tantric sex came into it, and karma and auras. But then, somehow, she seemed to be talking about widow spiders and the joys a rat felt running in a maze. I just sat there and decided that it wasn't that her nose was that big. It was just that it sort of probed at you as she talked. It seemed to poke about greedily for something she could get off me. Maybe she was a vampire. Possibly she was cuckoo. But I still didn't have to like her. I made several attempts to get up and go. She just pushed me back down again and went on talking. She had got onto tarot at some stage. She said she would sort me out by doing a reading. I was rescued by the sweetest lady. She was shortish and plumpish and darkish, with a rosy sort of innocent face, and she simply came up behind Tanziane and murmured something to her. Tanziane leapt backwards from me, yelling out, "Is that so?" Then she was off like an orange juggernaut through the bar, hitting tables and spilling people's drinks and yelling out, "Excuse me, I have to go see to my exhibit." The lady smiled at me and went away. She was wearing a long crimson robe thing and lots of necklaces, which ought to have looked as strange as Tanziane's orange, but it didn't. There was all the difference in the world. The crimson robe looked natural somehow, as if the lady deserved to wear it, and usually did wear it. I wondered who she was. Later, I found out she's called Zinka Fearon, and everyone I asked said she's marvellous. As soon as Tanziane's yells died away into the distance, I fled back here to my room and started writing this. Widow spiders. I thought to myself as I came up in the lift, rats, massage. How the hell does she think she knows rats enjoy mazes? And what has tarot to do with any of it? Nick banged at my door and came in a while back. It was after midnight by then, and we both said, "Where the hell have you been?" at the same instant, which made us both laugh. Then he said that I didn't miss much, not eating with the guests. It was dead boring. And one of them was a man called Something White he's always hated. He'd escaped before the end and looked for me because Universe 3 was showing The Princess Bride and he wanted to see it with me. "But you've seen The Princess Bride 3 times already, to my certain knowledge," I said. "I still wanted to see it," he said. "I went by myself in the end. But that wasn't what I came to say. That prat with the silver car who gave you the money, he's here." "I know," I said feelingly. "I've been wondering if we summoned him up by doing the witchy dance. It just seems so unlikely. Here, of all places." "Well," Nick said, looking rather odd, "you could be right. I'll tell you, I was just coming out of the lift just now. and I saw him standing up at the end of the corridor where the mirrors are. About 10 reflections of him, I know, I said, thinking of the fabulous Nordic type. No, Nick said. No, that was one of the odd things. There was only him. No reflections at all. But then the walls and the mirrors started turning round him, like a wheel. I mean, I saw the edges of the mirrors as they went round past him, honestly. We stared at one another queasily. Nick doesn't say things like that unless they're true, and I could see he was not having me on. Remind me never to do the witchy dance again, I said. I think it's this hotel, Nick said. It's the weirdest place. And full of weird folk, I agreed. That was over an hour ago at least. I kept plugging away at the keyboard because there is a disco going on downstairs. Another weird thing about this hotel is that you can't hear a thing from any of the people chasing about in it, but you can hear the disco loud and clear through 4 floors. But I think it's stopped now. I might get some sleep, with luck.